guys, welcome to the Land of Enchantment. I'm Melly Bloom, and for the purpose of this video, my name is Melissa. Um, this is part 2 of my ancestry story. I hope you tuned in for part 1. And where I had left off, I can catch up a little bit. So I took an ancestry test. I found out that my ancestry is pretty much what I'd always thought it was, which was a mixture of Irish, Scottish, and German. The surprise that I had was that my brother was my half-brother, meaning that my father, who I grew up with, was not my father. Subsequently, I contacted family members and friends and got told a couple names, and at the point where I left off in the story is that the 2 men that I had tested were not my father. So, my fake father had given me the name Gary, and that's where I left off. So Gary I knew because he was my mom's on and off boyfriend, and I searched for Gary for like 3 months, and I couldn't find him. And I was beginning to think he was dead because I couldn't find him. And then I realized I found a letter from him, and I realized I was spelling his last name wrong. So I spelled his last name right. And the first photo that I found was a picture of his obituary. So I was right, and he was dead. But I contacted one of his daughters, and she was willing to take the DNA test. And I mailed one to her, she got it, she took the test. Okay? So, in the meantime, I did not believe him to be my dad because, like I said all along, he had said I wasn't his daughter, and he wished I was, and I'm like, why would this man lie to me, you know? So, I decided to do my own investigating, and I'm kind of I'm smarter than the average bear, so the way that I did this was, I'm going to turn the page on my notes. I built a tree from my DNA matches, and one name kept popping up over and over. And so, while I was building this tree, I decided to get a hold of a couple of my matches. And my top match was the Ingle girl. And I cannot remember like what her username was, but through the magic of the internet and my prowessness, I was able to find her, and her name was Adrian. And I contacted Adrian, and right off, we hit it off right away. Oh, my kitty. And we were so similar. It was so crazy. And I knew that she was related to me through my biological father. But Adrian had some bad news to share with me. Adrian, her mother had died when she was 5, and she had no idea who her father was. And Adrian's mother had also been adopted, so Adrian had no family history for me. So, yay. So the next person that I contacted was a lady named Shirley. And Shirley said that she didn't know how we were connected either. But that she would, there was a family reunion coming up, and she would talk to family and see if there was any unknown kids out there. So, Shirley was really sweet. She was in her 80s, and she was so helpful. But, after the family reunion, there was no information to be shared. So, the next person that I hunted down was a woman named Christy. And when I saw Christy's profile picture, it was obvious we were related. There was a lot of similar features. So I contacted Christy, and she was so excited about this type of mystery that she was going to help solve. And Christy was actually very instrumental in solving this mystery. So I sent her pictures of me, and she was like, oh my god, it's so weird to like talk to somebody that looks so much like me, and you know, I never knew existed. And I was like, do you know which side of the family I'm from your family? And she said, I know that you are not from my father's side of the family because I've documented that tree well and I know that you're not one of them. But she said her mother's side of the family, there wasn't much information known because her mother's father, him and his brother, grew up in Kentucky and grew up in a cave. So I automatically knew that I was definitely on the right track because almost all my matches from my father's side of the family came from Kentucky. So we were on a good track. So she told me that when she looked into the pictures of my eyes, that her grandpa Carl, her mother's father, was staring back at her. And this is what she knew about him. He and his brother were kind of feral, and they were abandoned by their parents, and they spent a decent amount of time living in a cave. I know this is so crazy. Anyway, but that the mother had abandoned them and went on to marry, and that's all she knew. Okay, so now I had names to work with. I saw a picture of this man whose eyes I had when I did. And so I looked him up, and I was able to find out who the mother was that had abandoned him. And her name was Florence. And Florence had 2 additional children after she abandoned her son so coldly and callously. And she had 2 additional children by another man, and those children's names were James and Edith. So I looked up James, and I was able to find him through the power of the internet, and he's still alive. But I had a feeling he wasn't who I was looking for, because he lived in Iowa. I was able to look up a lot of information about him, and he just did not fit the right age to be my father. And I know he had kids, but I knew that his kids weren't the right age to also, or maybe he didn't have kids. I don't remember that part. I just knew it was nobody from him. So then I decided to concentrate on Edith. So Edith had died. And after all these Kentucky matches, Edith was from a town called St. Joseph, Missouri, where I was formerly from. I no longer live there. And so ding ding, right? Because now I finally have a lead. So Edith had passed, and there was a really nice obituary that was done about her. And I looked at the picture of the woman, and she didn't look like me, but, whatever. And so I had noticed that Edith had 3 sons. She had one son whose name was Dick. And she had another son whose name was Kevin. And she had another son whose name was Dan. So the first person that I started researching was Dick, Richard. And Richard had also passed away. And he was 10 years older than my mother. So me, seeing my mother have, this relationship with a 25-year-old man when she was 15 wasn't making sense. But I wasn't. I mean, it could have been something else. I didn't know then. I didn't know. So, then I decided to move on to Dan. And Dan was a few years older than my mother. And I thought, the chances of a 17-year-old and a 15-year-old are there. So maybe. So, the last person was a man named Kevin. And Kevin was a few months older than my mother. That's it, just a few. So I decided to get a hold of both Dan and Kevin because they were in the right age range, and they were both living close to or in the area that I was from. Hey, Khaleesi. So I did a background check on Kevin because he was the most likely suspect, in my opinion. And the background turned up that he made decent money, he didn't have any criminal activity, and that he was married. And I saw what year he was married, which thankfully was after I was conceived. And that he seemed to be a decent man, at least on paperwork. Okay. So I contacted Dan first. Or no, that's not true. I contacted Kevin. I sent him a Facebook message and said, do you know a woman named Dawn? And I never got an answer. So then I messaged his brother, Dan, asking the same question. Do you know a woman named Dawn? And again, no answer. Well, because I ran the background, I had some numbers that were like last known numbers of Kevin. So I tried them. And the third number, a man answered. And, hold on, I'm flipping again to... Okay, so a man answered, and I proceeded to ask questions. And I said, hi, my name is Melissa. And I recently had taken an ancestry test, and I found out that who I thought was my father is not my father. And I know that you are somehow related to the person that is my father. And I said, and you are looking like you're probably that person. And he says, why do you think this? And I said, because of my DNA. And I was trying to explain it to him, but he didn't really know much about DNA then. I will let you know he is expert level now. And so he told me he wasn't living in St. Joseph at the time that I was conceived. Said he wished me well, and he would get a hold of his brother Dan and talk to him and have a nice life. So I started messaging his brother and Dan again, and Dan answered me back. And Dan said he didn't know I could be his child. He had done a lot of partying back then. He didn't know. And that, I kind of looked like his family, so there was a chance. And so then I started asking him about, and he asked me how I came to the conclusion that it was them. I forgot. And I said, your half uncles, Sam and Carl. Carl is like a great uncle of mine through ancestry. And he said, I don't have any half uncles on my mom's side named Sam and Carl. And I was like, yes, you do. And so it turns out Florence didn't share that information with anybody. And their mother had only shared that information with one person, and that was Kevin. So Kevin, Dan turned around and looked at Kevin and said, who is Sam and Carl? And Kevin said, how do you know about Sam and Carl? I'm the only person that Mom told about her having two half-brothers that her mother had abandoned, and that she wished she had always known what had happened to them, and their names was Sam and Carl. So I had piqued Kevin's interest because I think at first he thought I was scamming him. So lo and behold, he messages me back, and he admits that he was living in St. Joseph at the time that I was conceived. And now he also acknowledged there was a possibility that I was his daughter. So that was... I will put pictures and let you see what I saw. And when I looked at the picture of Kevin, I saw my face. And when I looked at the pictures of Dan, I saw parts of me. And so he started asking me questions. He said, what's your blood type? And I said A positive. And so was his. And my mother was O positive. And he asked me if I had wide feet, and I said, yes, I have very wide feet. It's been a burden of mine most of my life. So this was also a burden of his family's, and they called them duck feet. So then he asked me about ears, and I thought that was a strange thing to be asked about. But apparently he had some unique ears that folded. And I said, my ears are normal, as you can see. But my grandson, his ears were folded at the top. And when my grandson was born, we all commented and wondered where those really strange ears came from. So, not that they're bad. They are a family trait. Okay. So, we proceeded to talk a lot. I looked at pictures of his children, which, by the way, he had 2 additional sons and 2 additional daughters. And they finally, some people that looked like me. Unlike Albert's, one kizzies. Unlike Albert's family, who looked nothing like me. So I'm looking at these pictures of his children, and these children do look like me. His eldest daughter, which is older than me, she's also adopted, and she didn't look like me, of course, because she was her mother's daughter, and not Kevin's blood daughter. So, this is the second part to this series, and I'm going to have a third part because I didn't want to make it so long that you guys would lose interest. So my name is Melly Bloom, and make sure and hit that subscribe button and hit that notification icon and come back and see me, and remember to slay the day.